A soft autumn breeze drifted through the open kitchen window of Rachel Adams's apartment in Chicago. The late afternoon light touched the counters with a gentle gold, turning the steam from the tea kettle into a faint mist. Rachel stood at the small wooden table sorting through the day's mail. Bills. A grocery flyer. A letter with a silver seal and handwriting she recognized but had not seen in years. She paused, fingertips resting on the envelope. The handwriting carried her backward in time, back to Boston, back to hallways lined with green lockers and the laughter of teenagers who thought life would always stay the same. The return address said Eastwood High Alumni Committee. Beneath it, in careful script, were the words 10th year reunion. Rachel drew a slow breath. 10 years. 10 full years since she had walked out of those doors for the last time, wearing a cap and gown and believing that everything in her life was about to unfold perfectly. 10 years since she had first fallen in love with Michael Thompson, the boy who had promised her forever and left her with silence instead. She slit the envelope with the edge of a butter knife and unfolded the heavy card. The invitation shimmered with silver letters: "You are warmly invited to celebrate a decade of memories with the class of 2015. Saturday, October 8, at the Grand Lakeside Ballroom, Boston Harbor." A small note at the bottom encouraged alumni to bring a guest. Rachel set the card down. Her heart felt both heavy and restless. She had built a life far away from Boston and all the memories there, yet part of her still heard the echo of that old world. She pictured Michael's smile, the one that had once made her feel chosen, and the way it had hardened during their last year together. He had loved the spotlight captain of the football team, always laughing in the center of a crowd. She had loved quiet things, sketching in the art room, long walks by the harbor. Their marriage had been quick, a decision made in the excitement of youth. They were barely 21, full of big plans and bigger dreams. But Michael wanted fast success, bigger cities, more applause. Rachel wanted a home, a small studio where she could paint, and evenings filled with peace. Their differences had stretched like a rope pulled too tight until, at last, it snapped. Now, at 30, Rachel had learned to live without those memories pressing on her. She was an art teacher at a neighborhood school and a painter whose landscapes sometimes appeared in small galleries. Her apartment smelled of fresh canvas and jasmine tea. She had friends, students who adored her, and a quiet happiness she protected like a flame. Yet the invitation seemed to whisper, "Come back. See what has changed. See who you have become." The sound of a key in the lock broke her thoughts. The door opened and David Johnson stepped in, his warm smile filling the room as easily as the autumn light. David, her husband of 3 years, carried a bag of groceries in one hand and a newspaper under his arm. "Something smells like tea and paint," he said, setting the bag down with an easy grin. "And something looks like a letter that made you stop breathing." Rachel laughed softly and held up the card. "High school reunion. Boston. 10 years. David raised his eyebrows. "Eastwood High? The famous place you never talk about." "I talk about it," she said, though she knew she rarely did. "Just not very much." David poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. He had the kind of calm presence that steadied any room. His company designed educational software used in schools across the country, but he never led with that fact. What mattered to him was helping others, not displaying wealth. "Are you going to go?" he asked gently. Rachel looked down at the silver letters again. "I'm not sure. It's been a long time. People I haven't seen in years. And Michael will probably be there." David nodded, understanding without needing details. He knew the broad strokes of her first marriage, the quick wedding, the quiet heartbreak, the long healing. He had never pressed for more. "Would it bother you to see him?" David asked. "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "It's not anger anymore. Just a shadow." David reached across the table and took her hand. "Then maybe it's time to see the shadow in daylight," he said. "Not for him. For you. To remember that you are not that person anymore." Rachel smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be easy," David said. "But you're stronger than the memories." They stood for a while in the quiet kitchen, the sounds of the city faint through the window. Rachel thought of the students who admired her paintings, the neighbors who came to her small gallery shows, the peaceful evenings she and David shared. That life had nothing to do with Michael or the girl she had been at 18. Later, after dinner, Rachel carried the invitation into her studio. Canvases leaned against the walls, harbor sunsets, Chicago rooftops, the soft blues and greens of early morning light. She placed the card on her work table and sat in the high-backed chair she used when sketching. Her mind wandered back to the night she and Michael had danced at the senior prom. She remembered the song that played, the way he whispered promises about the future. Those promises had faded like old paint, but the memory was still vivid. Rachel closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of turpentine and fresh paper. She thought of the long path she had taken since then, nights of loneliness after the divorce, days when she doubted her talent, months of working in small jobs while saving for art school. And then, slowly, the world had opened again, her first exhibition in a tiny cafe, the letters from children whose lives she touched through art. Meeting David on a rainy afternoon at a community fundraiser. Falling in love again, this time with someone who valued kindness more than applause. When she opened her eyes, the invitation still waited. The silver letters seemed softer now, less like a challenge and more like an opportunity. The next morning Rachel took the card to school and showed it to her friend and fellow teacher, Mary Clark, during their lunch break. "You should absolutely go," Mary said, nibbling on an apple slice. "You're amazing, Rachel. Let them see what you've done." Rachel laughed. "It's not about showing off." "Of course not," Mary said. "It's about seeing that you don't need to hide from your past." That night, Rachel finally picked up her phone and booked 2 plane tickets to Boston. She didn't announce the decision with fanfare, she simply pressed the confirmation button and let out a slow breath. As she set the phone down, David wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Boston in October," he said. "The leaves will be beautiful." Rachel leaned into him, feeling the quiet strength of his presence. For the first time in years, the thought of seeing Michael and those old classmates did not fill her with dread. Instead, it felt like the closing of a circle, a chance to stand in the same room with the people who once defined her life and show without a single boast that she had grown beyond it all. Outside the window, the Chicago night glittered with city lights. Rachel traced the edge of the invitation with one finger and whispered to herself, "I'm ready." The crisp October air greeted Rachel and David as they stepped out of the taxi in front of the Grand Lakeside Ballroom. The evening sun had just touched the horizon, turning Boston Harbor into a sheet of burnished copper. The building itself shimmered with glass windows that reflected the colors of the sunset. Warm lights glowed inside, promising music and memories. Rachel's heart fluttered as she adjusted the strap of her simple navy dress. She had chosen it for comfort more than fashion, but it suited her, soft, elegant, and unpretentious. David, steady as always, slipped his arm through hers. "You okay?" he asked quietly, reading her face as easily as if it were one of her paintings. "I think so," she said, taking a slow breath. It's strange to walk back into a world I left behind. You're not the same person who left, David reminded her. That's the point. Inside, a soft melody from a live jazz trio floated across the wide hall. Chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen. Along the far wall, a large banner read, "Welcome Eastwood High Class of 2015, 10 years of memories." Clusters of guests stood chatting, glasses of sparkling cider or champagne in their hands. Rachel felt a small tug of nostalgia. Faces she hadn't seen in a decade turned toward her, some instantly familiar, others changed by time. A woman with bright red hair waved excitedly. Rachel Adams. "I can't believe it," cried Laura Bennett, her old friend from art class. She hurried forward and wrapped Rachel in a quick hug. "You look amazing. And this must be your husband." David shook hands warmly. "David Johnson. Nice to meet you. Laura and I once painted an entire hallway mural the night before graduation," Rachel said with a smile. Laura laughed. "We were almost caught, remember? But the principal liked it so much he left it up for years." The three of them chatted for a while, catching up on jobs, travels, and memories. Other classmates joined in: Mark Turner, who now worked as a park ranger, and Emily Brooks, who taught music at a local school. Rachel found herself laughing more easily than she expected. The nervous tension began to loosen. But then a familiar voice carried across the room. It was a voice Rachel knew even before she turned toward it, confident, smooth, and unmistakably loud. Well, look who finally showed up," said Michael Thompson, striding toward them with the same air of ownership he'd worn in high school. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit, hair perfectly styled, a watch glinting on his wrist. Time had carved faint lines near his eyes, but the smile was still the same, charming on the surface, proud underneath. Rachel's breath caught for a single heartbeat. The years fell away, and for an instant she saw the boy who had once made her believe in forever. Then the moment passed. She straightened, her voice calm. "Hello, Michael," she said. "It's been a long time." Michael's eyes flicked to David, then back to Rachel. "I'll say. And you brought a guest." He extended his hand to David with a polite but measured look. "David Johnson," David said, shaking his hand firmly. "Michael Thompson," Michael replied. "Class of 2015 quarterback, in case she didn't mention it." David smiled politely. "I've heard a little." Michael's grin widened, but there was a hint of something sharper behind it. Rachel always did keep her circle small. Never much for the spotlight. He turned slightly to include the small group of listening classmates. "Back then she said she'd be a famous artist. Guess that didn't exactly happen, huh?" The words floated into the quiet around them. Some of the guests shifted awkwardly. Laura frowned. Rachel felt the old hurt stir, but she refused to give it power. Her voice remained steady. "I still paint every day," she said. "And I teach art to children. It's the work I love." Michael lifted his brows as if amused. "Teaching? Well, that's nice." His tone made the simple word sound small. David stepped a little closer, his presence calm but strong. "That sounds more meaningful than nice to me," he said in an even voice. "Helping young people find their creativity is a gift." A few people nearby nodded, their expressions softening. Michael gave a brief shrug, as if brushing the subject aside. "I run a real estate firm now," he said, clearly eager to redirect the conversation. Luxury properties. High stakes. Big deals. That sounds like a lot of responsibility, Rachel said politely. She would not let him pull her into a contest. Michael's grin returned. It is. But you know me, always chasing the big game. Some people like small ponds. I like the ocean. Rachel simply smiled, choosing silence over argument. Years ago, she might have tried to prove herself, but she was not the same young woman anymore. Laura stepped in, her voice bright. Rachel's work was in the Harborview Gallery last spring. I went to the opening, it was packed. Michael blinked, the news seeming to catch him off guard. Really? It was beautiful, Laura continued. Landscapes of Boston and Chicago. People loved them. Rachel felt a quiet warmth at her friend's support. It was a small show, she said modestly. Michael gave a thin smile, as if unsure whether to challenge or congratulate. He quickly turned to another classmate and began talking about his latest investment. Rachel exhaled slowly. David placed a gentle hand on her back. You handled that with a lot of grace, he murmured. She gave a small smile. I promised myself I wouldn't let old memories run the evening. As the night went on, Rachel found herself in deeper conversations with people she had almost forgotten. Emily shared stories of her students, Mark described his work in the national parks. They spoke of family, small joys, and the unexpected paths life had taken. Every so often, Rachel noticed Michael glancing her way. There was curiosity in his eyes now, a flicker of something less certain than the confidence he wore like a suit. During a break in the music, Rachel stepped out to the balcony overlooking the harbor. The night air smelled of salt and autumn leaves. Lights from boats dotted the dark water, and the city skyline glowed behind them. David joined her, holding 2 cups of hot cider. It's beautiful out here, he said, handing her one. Boston always was, Rachel replied. She took a sip and felt the warmth spread through her hands. It's strange, though. Everything feels smaller than I remember. That's because you've grown, David said gently. The place hasn't changed, you have. She looked at him, her heart steady. I was nervous about tonight, she admitted. But now I see. I'm not that same girl. The one who thought Michael's opinion was the world. David brushed a strand of hair from her face. I know. You've built something real. That's what matters. From inside the hall came a sudden burst of laughter, Michael's voice, still carrying above the music. Rachel turned toward the sound, but this time it held no power. They stayed on the balcony a while longer, watching the harbor lights and the quiet ripple of water. The night was cool but not cold, the kind of air that clears the mind. Rachel felt a calm strength settle within her, as if the years of distance and healing were finally complete. When they returned to the ballroom, the dance floor had filled. Laura waved them over. Come dance, she called. David smiled. Shall we? Rachel nodded, letting him lead her into the soft glow of lights and music. As they moved together, she noticed Michael watching from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but Rachel no longer needed to know what it meant. The evening stretched on with music, conversation, and laughter, new memories being made among the old. Rachel realized she was exactly where she was meant to be, in the present, with a heart that no longer belonged to the past. The music slowed to a softer rhythm, and the crowd on the dance floor thinned. Rachel and David moved easily together, the gentle sway of the song matching the quiet beat of her heart. The earlier tension had melted away. Each step felt like proof that she had outgrown the fears she carried when she first opened the invitation. When the song ended, they returned to a small table near the windows. From there, Rachel could see the harbor lights flickering against the dark water. She set her cider cup down and smiled. "I didn't expect to feel this calm," she admitted. David leaned forward, his eyes warm. "That's because you belong to the life you've built, not to what you left behind." Rachel reached for his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You always know what to say." Across the room, clusters of classmates shared stories and laughter. Some danced, others posed for photographs near a large banner that read "Eastwood High 10 Years of Memories." A quiet happiness filled the air. Rachel noticed how different everyone looked. The high school rivalries and teenage shine had been replaced by something deeper: real lives, real struggles, and real growth. But one face remained fixed in her thoughts. Michael stood near the refreshments, surrounded by a small circle of people who seemed eager to hear about his latest real estate project. He laughed a little too loudly, and his hand gestures grew bigger each time he described a deal. There was a restless edge to him, as if he wanted the whole room to keep watching. Laura approached their table and sat down beside Rachel. "You're handling tonight beautifully," she whispered. "When I saw Michael walk in earlier, I thought it might be awkward." "It was at first," Rachel admitted, "but now, it just feels like a memory I can look at without pain." Laura smiled. "That's growth. I'm proud of you." David nodded. "So am I." They chatted for a few minutes about old art projects and mutual friends who couldn't attend. But as Rachel glanced toward Michael again, she sensed something unsettled. His laughter had faded. He stood alone for a moment, staring out at the dance floor as if unsure where to go next. For a brief second their eyes met. He gave a faint nod, almost like a silent request for a word. Rachel hesitated. Part of her wanted to avoid another conversation, but another part, older, steadier, knew this might be the final step toward closure. She turned to David. "I think I'll speak with him for a minute," she said quietly. David's gaze was kind. "I'll be right here." Rachel crossed the room, weaving through groups of classmates until she reached Michael. Up close, she noticed the slight slump in his shoulders and the tiredness around his eyes. "Hi," she said gently. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" Michael blinked, surprised, then gestured toward a quieter corner near the tall windows. "Sure," he said. They stepped aside, the hum of conversation softening behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. The harbor lights cast a pale reflection on the glass. "You look good," Michael finally said, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier bravado. "It's been a long time." "It has," Rachel replied. "How have you been?" Michael let out a short breath. "Busy. Work never stops. Deals, meetings, clients, it's all noise." He paused and looked at her with a faint, almost regretful smile. "I was out of line earlier. I shouldn't have said those things." Rachel tilted her head, studying him. "Why did you?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Old habits, I guess. I used to think success meant winning every room. When I saw you walk in, I didn't know how to handle it. Part of me thought you'd still care what I thought." Rachel felt a calm settle over her. "I cared once," she said honestly. "But that was a long time ago. We were young. We wanted different things." Michael nodded, his eyes dropping to the floor. "You deserved better than the way I treated you. I was chasing attention, money, everything but real happiness. And I let you go because I didn't know what mattered." The confession hung in the air like a gentle weight. Rachel remembered the late nights waiting for him to come home, the arguments that ended in silence. She had cried for weeks after their marriage ended, but those tears belonged to another lifetime. "I hope you've found some peace," she said softly. "I'm still learning," he admitted. "Seeing you tonight, I realize what I lost. Not because of David, not because of money, but because you built a life with meaning. I see it in the way you carry yourself." Rachel offered a small, understanding smile. "We all find our own path. I'm glad you're finding yours." For the first time that night, Michael's shoulders eased. "Thank you," he said. "That means more than you know." A voice called from across the room, someone asking him about a photo. He gave Rachel a small, respectful nod. "Take care of yourself, Rachel." "You too, Michael," she replied. As she returned to the table, Rachel felt no triumph, no bitterness, only a quiet release. The shadow that had lingered for years finally felt like it had dissolved into the night. David looked up as she approached. "How was that?" "Good," she said, sitting beside him. "It needed to happen. And now it's done." They stayed for another hour, enjoying the music and conversation. Rachel found herself laughing with classmates she hadn't thought about in years, people who had once been background characters in her story but now seemed like old friends rediscovered. She listened to their journeys. Some had started families, others had faced hardships, and many had changed careers more than once. Life had humbled them all in different ways. Later, a small group gathered near the old photo display set up by the reunion committee. Rachel walked over with David to look at the snapshots from their teenage years. There she was at 17, standing next to Michael in their graduation robes, a bright smile on her face. She studied the picture for a long moment, then smiled softly. "That girl had no idea what was ahead," she said. "She made it through," David replied. "And she became someone amazing." Rachel turned to him, her eyes warm. "We became someone amazing," she said, and they shared a quiet smile. As the evening wound down, guests began exchanging hugs and promises to meet again before another decade passed. The band packed up their instruments, and the chandeliers dimmed slightly. Rachel and David stepped outside into the cool night air. The harbor breeze carried the faint scent of salt and pine. Boston at night sparkled like a living painting. Boats bobbed in the water, their lights twinkling against the deep blue sky. Rachel slipped her arm through David's. "Thank you for coming with me," she said. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," David replied. They walked slowly along the waterfront, the sounds of the reunion fading behind them. Rachel felt lighter, as if she had set down a heavy bag she had been carrying for years. She realized that the reunion had not been about Michael or old memories. It had been about reclaiming her own story, proving to herself that the past had no hold over the woman she had become. They paused at the edge of the pier, watching the reflections ripple across the water. David looked at her, his eyes full of quiet admiration. "You stood tall tonight," he said. "That strength, it's beautiful." Rachel smiled, her heart peaceful. "I think I finally understand something," she said. "Forgiveness isn't about excusing the past. It's about setting yourself free." They stayed there for a while, letting the cool breeze brush against their faces. The city lights glowed like distant stars, and the sound of gentle waves filled the silence. Rachel felt a deep certainty settle within her, a certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with the person she was meant to share life with, and that the next chapter of her story was already unfolding. The night along Boston Harbor deepened, the sky now a velvet blue sprinkled with faint stars. Inside the grand lakeside ballroom, the reunion celebration still glowed with warm light. Music from the jazz trio drifted like a soft current, and the hum of conversation wrapped the room in gentle energy. Rachel and David had just returned from their quiet walk by the pier. A hint of cool salt air clung to Rachel's dress as they stepped back inside. The scene felt different now, less like a return to the past and more like a gathering of lives moving forward. Laura Bennett waved them over to a round table where a few classmates were sharing stories. "You two disappeared," Laura teased. "We were starting to think you'd eloped all over again." Rachel laughed, easing into a seat. "Just needed some fresh air." David pulled out a chair beside her. "The harbor is beautiful tonight," he added, his calm voice inviting friendly smiles from the group. The conversation turned to travel adventures and funny memories from senior year. Mark Turner described his close encounter with a moose in a national park. Emily Brooks told a humorous story about a middle school concert gone wrong. Laughter flowed easily. Rachel found herself enjoying every detail, the kind of easy connection that only comes when people have grown beyond the competition of youth. Yet, even in the midst of the pleasant chatter, Rachel sensed a subtle shift in the room. A hush fell for a moment near the entrance, like a wave of surprise moving across the crowd. Heads turned toward the double doors. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit had just stepped inside. His confident stride and warm smile caught the light as he moved forward. There was something unmistakably magnetic about him, someone both familiar and larger than life. Rachel blinked, startled. It was David's business partner, Henry Collins, a well-known figure in the technology world and a longtime friend of David's. She knew Henry was influential, but she hadn't expected to see him here. Behind him came another figure, broad-shouldered, elegant, with an easy grace that drew quiet admiration from the crowd. Rachel's breath caught when she realized it was the founder of the Johnson Foundation, David's own uncle, William Johnson, a philanthropist whose name often appeared in national newspapers for his education projects and generous community work. "David," Henry said warmly as he approached, "there you are. We were in town for meetings and decided to drop by. I hope that's not too much of a surprise." David rose with genuine delight. "Henry, Uncle William, what a wonderful surprise. Everyone, these are dear friends of mine." The room seemed to shift again, a ripple of recognition running through the guests. Several classmates exchanged whispers, even the hotel staff straightened with quiet respect. William Johnson's reputation as a visionary business leader and generous philanthropist preceded him. Rachel stood, greeting them with a graceful smile. "It's good to see you both," she said warmly. Michael, who had been speaking with another group nearby, turned sharply at the sound of David's voice. His eyes widened as he recognized the prominent faces now standing at the table. He hesitated, the confident posture he had carried all evening faltering ever so slightly. Henry extended his hand to Rachel. "David's been telling me about your art exhibits," he said kindly. "I hope I can visit your next show. I've seen photos of your landscapes, they're remarkable." Rachel thanked him, touched by the sincere compliment. William smiled at her with equal warmth. "David speaks of your work often. Creativity like yours deserves an even wider audience. If you ever consider a gallery in New York, I'd be happy to help." A few classmates nearby exchanged astonished looks. To hear such praise from respected national figures was more than anyone expected at a casual reunion. David placed a gentle arm around Rachel's shoulders. "Her latest collection nearly sold out," he said with quiet pride. "Her talent amazes me every day." The words were simple, but they carried a depth that filled Rachel's heart with quiet joy. He wasn't bragging, he was sharing genuine admiration. Around them, the energy shifted, no longer about titles or wealth, but about respect for art, kindness, and the life they had built together. Across the room, Michael stood frozen for a moment. His earlier bravado seemed to melt under the soft but undeniable presence of David's friends and family. He approached slowly, as if drawn by curiosity he couldn't hide. "David," he said, forcing a cordial smile. "Quite a gathering tonight." His eyes flicked toward Henry and William, recognition dawning. "I didn't realize, you keep impressive company." David turned with a friendly, steady expression. "Michael, good to see you again. This is Henry Collins and my uncle William Johnson." Michael shook hands quickly, his usual smooth confidence replaced by a more cautious politeness. "Pleasure to meet you both," he said, his voice quieter than before. William nodded kindly. "Likewise. It's a beautiful evening to celebrate old friendships." There was no arrogance in his tone, only a calm dignity that filled the space more powerfully than any boast. Michael cleared his throat, searching for words. "Rachel," he paused, perhaps remembering their earlier conversation. "Your paintings. I didn't know they'd reached so many people." Rachel met his gaze with gentle composure. "Art has a way of traveling quietly," she replied. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. It was not heavy but honest, an unspoken acknowledgement of the years and choices that had brought them all to this night. Henry glanced toward the band. "Shall we celebrate with some music?" he suggested, breaking the tension. "I think a dance is in order." The trio began a lively tune. David offered Rachel his hand, and together they stepped onto the dance floor. Around them, classmates followed, filling the room with movement and laughter once again. As they danced, Rachel felt the subtle weight of the evening lift entirely. David's steady rhythm guided her across the polished floor. She caught sight of Michael at the edge of the crowd, watching for a moment before turning to join another group. His expression was neither jealous nor bitter, just thoughtful, perhaps finally understanding that the past no longer defined either of them. Laura danced nearby and called out, "Rachel, you two look like you belong on a movie poster." Rachel laughed, the sound light and free. "We're just enjoying the music," she replied. The song ended to warm applause, and David led Rachel back toward their table. Henry and William joined them again, sharing kind words about the evening and gentle teasing about David's dance moves. The conversation turned to future plans, art exhibitions, new charity projects, and the possibility of Rachel contributing to a national program that brought art into public schools. Rachel listened, her heart swelling with gratitude. Not because of the powerful names or grand opportunities, but because she felt seen not as someone's ex-wife or as a footnote to another person's success, but as herself, a woman who had worked hard to build a meaningful life. As the night stretched toward its close, classmates began exchanging hugs and promises to meet again before another decade passed. Many stopped by Rachel's table to offer warm words about her art or to congratulate her on the evening's quiet triumph. Even Michael returned one last time. His voice was steady, without the earlier sharpness. "Rachel," he said softly, "I'm glad you came. Truly. You've built something real. I respect that." Rachel met his gaze and offered a kind smile. "Thank you, Michael. I hope you find the same." He nodded, a genuine look of reflection in his eyes, before stepping away. When the final song faded and the chandeliers dimmed, David helped Rachel into her coat. Together they walked out into the crisp Boston night. The harbor sparkled beneath a sky of scattered stars, and the quiet city lights mirrored in the water like brush strokes on a canvas. David looked at her with gentle admiration. "Tonight was yours," he said. "Not because of anything I or anyone else did, but because of your strength." Rachel slipped her hand into his. "Tonight was ours," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "It feels like a door has finally closed and another one is opening." They strolled along the waterfront, the sound of waves steady and comforting. Behind them the ballroom lights faded, but ahead the city stretched wide and welcoming. Rachel felt a calm certainty settle deep within her. She had faced the past with grace, and the future was hers to paint. Morning sunlight poured across the wide windows of the Beacon Hill townhouse as Rachel awoke. The quiet hum of the city drifted upward, distant bells, the low roll of traffic, a gull's call from the harbor. She lay still for a moment, letting the soft light warm her face. The night before felt almost like a dream, yet every detail remained bright and clear: the music, the conversations, the gentle way David had stood beside her as the past finally lost its power. David was already in the kitchen when she came down the old wooden staircase. He wore a light blue shirt, sleeves rolled neatly at the elbows, and he was brewing coffee while reading the morning news on a tablet. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that carried quiet admiration. "How are you feeling after last night's adventure?" Rachel poured herself tea and leaned against the counter. "Light," she answered honestly. "As if I finally set down a heavy bag I didn't realize I was still carrying." David nodded, sliding a small plate of warm croissants toward her. "You handled everything with so much grace. I kept watching you and thinking how proud I am." She touched his arm in thanks. "I'm proud of us," she said. "It wasn't about proving anything. It was about showing up, being who we are now." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the rich scent of coffee filling the room. Through the tall windows, sunlight traced golden lines across the brick walls and framed the quiet confidence that now settled between them. Later that morning, Rachel stepped into her art studio, a bright room at the back of the house filled with canvases, brushes, and the faint scent of linseed oil. She paused to study a half-finished painting of the Boston waterfront. The soft blues and grays of the harbor captured the calm she felt inside. Her phone buzzed with a new email. It was from William Johnson, David's uncle, written in his thoughtful style: "Your art carries a rare kind of peace. If you are willing, I'd like to sponsor a traveling exhibition of your work starting in New York this autumn." Rachel read the words twice, her heart beating faster. An exhibition that would travel beyond Boston had been a quiet dream for years. She set the phone down and breathed deeply, the possibility stretching like a bright horizon. David stepped into the studio, holding his second cup of coffee. "Good news?" he asked, reading the hopeful glow in her face. She handed him the phone. "William wants to sponsor a traveling show." David's smile widened with genuine joy. "Rachel, that's incredible. You've earned every bit of it." "It feels like the right next step," she said softly. "Not because of the attention, but because I finally feel ready to share more of my world." David studied the painting on the easel. "Your work will speak to people." "It already does." That afternoon, Rachel received another unexpected message, this time from Laura Bennett, her longtime friend from school. Laura suggested a small lunch gathering with a few classmates who had been touched by Rachel's words at the reunion. "They want to hear more about your art and maybe help with community projects," Laura explained when Rachel called back. "I think last night inspired them." Rachel agreed, touched by the invitation. It felt like another gentle thread tying her past and present together, not with tension but with mutual respect. 2 days later, she met Laura, Mark Turner, and a few others at a sunny cafe overlooking the Charles River. The conversation flowed easily, memories of old teachers, plans for family trips, dreams of future collaborations. "Your courage last night encouraged us all," Mark admitted. "Seeing someone face the past so kindly, it makes you want to live with that same honesty." Rachel smiled, humbled. "It wasn't courage as much as acceptance," she said. "We all have chapters that end. We choose how to carry them." Laura reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You showed us a good way." They began discussing an idea for an art and education event for local schools. Rachel listened with quiet excitement, realizing how the night of the reunion had become more than a personal milestone. It had opened doors for community and creativity. That evening, Rachel and David walked along the harbor once more, the water catching the last blush of sunset. Seagulls dipped low, and the distant sound of a ferry horn echoed across the bay. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" David asked as they leaned against the railing. "Every day," Rachel answered. "But last night made me see it more clearly. I'm not defined by old pain. I'm defined by what I choose to build now." David looked at her with quiet admiration. "And you build beauty, Rachel. In art. In life." They watched the sky deepen to twilight, their hands intertwined. Around them, the city pulsed with quiet life, but for a moment it felt as if time itself paused to honor the calm they had earned. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail, cream-colored with careful handwriting. Rachel opened it to find a short note from Michael. "Rachel, seeing you at the reunion reminded me of the better parts of our shared history. I want to apologize not for leaving, because life took us where it needed to, but for the times I made you feel small. You never were. I wish you every success and happiness." Michael. Rachel read the letter slowly, a quiet understanding settling over her. There was no bitterness left, only a gentle acknowledgement of what had passed and the freedom of moving forward. She placed the note in a small box where she kept meaningful letters, not as a wound but as a marker of growth. Autumn arrived with crisp air and bright leaves swirling across the city streets. Rachel's traveling exhibition opened in New York with a warm reception. Critics praised the way her paintings captured stillness and hope. Visitors lingered before her canvases, some moved to quiet tears. David stood beside her on opening night, offering silent support as guests approached with kind words. Among them were art students, families, and even a few classmates who had traveled from Boston to surprise her. "This is just the beginning," David whispered when the last guests left and the gallery lights dimmed. "Wherever this journey takes us, I'm with you." Rachel looked around the gallery, the soft light on the paintings, the quiet echo of footsteps fading into night. "It feels like more than art," she said. "It feels like a whole life finally unfolding." Months passed, filled with travel, new friendships, and creative work. Rachel visited small towns and large cities, teaching workshops for children and sharing stories of resilience. Everywhere she went, she carried the calm strength she had discovered on the night of the reunion. Each evening, when she returned to her hotel or to the home she and David shared, she found peace in the simple truth: the past no longer held her. She had faced it, honored it, and let it go. One winter evening, after a successful show in Chicago, she and David walked beneath a sky bright with stars. Snowflakes spun around them like tiny sparks of light. David paused, pulling her close. "Remember when we first met?" he asked with a smile. "You were painting in that small studio near the river. I told you the world needed your art." "I remember," Rachel said, laughter soft in her voice. I didn't believe you at first. You believe it now? I do, she answered. Because I finally believe in myself. They stood together in the quiet snowfall, the world wide and open before them. Years later, when Rachel thought back to that high school reunion, she did not think of Michael's early arrogance or even the quiet triumph of that night. She remembered instead the way the harbor lights shimmered, the warmth of old friends, and the steady presence of the man who had walked beside her every step of the way. She had gone there wondering if she might feel small again. Instead, she had discovered her own vastness, how far she had come, how much love she had built, and how beautifully life could unfold when one chose forgiveness and hope. The chapter that began with an evening of memories ended not with a single dramatic moment, but with an endless horizon. And every new dawn, every blank canvas, reminded her that the best stories were still waiting to be painted.